Well, Rebecca, it's McLaughlin, right? That's how you
No,
pronounce it?
when I married my husband, he's American, and so they pronounce it McLaughlin. But in England, it would be McLaughlin, and so I said I'll change my name to McLaughlin if you
Oh,
change how you pronounce it. So yeah,
well,
technically McLaughlin.
I've heard it pronounced both ways online with you, and so I didn't.
I'm
I
very
forgot to
patient.
ask before we started.
All right.
But I'm really really grateful that you're able to give us some of your time. I've benefited a lot from your book, Confronting Christianity, which we've passed around quite a bit, and your articles very sharp. You have equipped and helped me quite a bit, and so I was just wanting our community to experience some of that. And we were talking offline just briefly. I was telling you that we're in this series of on intimacy with Jesus, and our lives are more hidden. There's less of a performative part to our life. At least there's some on social media still, but there's less of that in our life, and more hidden and intimate with Jesus. And so I'd love just to hear from you. What does that story look like for you? Where did your life go from knowing about God to intimacy with Jesus?
Mm. I grew up in a church-going but very mixed-up family, where
Mm,
my mum's family sort of traditionally was a Catholic family, and my dad was from a church-going Church of England family. But in both cases, there was a real mix as to whether people had any actual faith versus church just being what you did on a Sunday morning. And
yeah.
so I grew up as a young child. At points we were going 1 week to a Catholic church, 1 week to an Anglican church, and very much seemed to be just what one did as a British person on a Sunday morning.
Mm,
When I was a kind of older child, around the age of 9, my mum had been quite severely ill for a number of years, and she got to the point where she was hospitalized. And I realized at that point that really anything I could put my trust in could be gone overnight. I was told my mum was unlikely to recover.
mm,
And at that point, I think it became clear to me that Jesus was really the only person who I could entirely count on. And that if he was who he said he was, he wouldn't be gone tomorrow under any circumstances.
mm.
So I couldn't say exactly when I owned faith in Jesus for myself, but I do remember a very clarifying point at that stage in my life when I just thought, you know what, if there is any hope in this world, it's Jesus. And in fact, Jesus is truly the only hope that I have.
Mm. And when I read you, you have a pretty intellectual depth to your writing, but there's also I was just talking with someone about your work, that there seems to be a strong sensitivity to a life with God, both in your writing. So just a strong intellectual, like you're working with ideas, and you've obviously interacted with a lot of people in your work, but also there seems to be an importance to a life with God on top with that. And how do you balance the two? I mean, we're in Manhattan, and so it seems to be either full extreme, I'm just living my heart and expressing myself, or I'm just in the life of the mind, and sometimes in the life of the mind the penny doesn't drop to the heart. And so yeah, where did that drop for you, or how does that even work out for you in your own life?
I think I grew up in a very academic family that highly prized the life of the mind, and where thankfully faith and learning were always seen as going together. That was very much the view that my parents took. So I don't, unlike some of my friends actually who grew up in America, that there was never a bifurcation of those two things. But as I mentioned, I feel like I came to very much my own faith relatively early on. And then I was in educational environments where I was typically the only Christian around, and
Yeah.
certainly the most outspoken Christian around. And so I was sort of used to being different and to articulating my faith in ways that more intellectually minded people would be able to engage with. So I feel like that piece has always come easily to me, or it's fascinating to me, and so it's easy for me to spend time on. I think the personal end of things, I have a theory which may be entirely wrong, and I haven't tested it with enough people for this to be proven one way or the other. I'm very much an extrovert. Like if you do any personality test on me, I'm sort of at the extreme end of extrovert, and other things are, somewhat balanced. And so to me, going to church on a Sunday is the highlight of my week. I mean, singing with God's people is an incredibly powerful experience for me, and having that sense of coming together with Jesus in the midst of his body is massive for me. And it's something that's sort of very easy. I do not understand why some Christians don't want to go to church every week. I mean, this phenomenon of going like once or twice a month, it just makes no sense to me at all. Because I'm like, why on earth would you not want to come to church? Is the best thing. Because I'm such an extrovert, for me, the discipline of sitting down alone with the scriptures and with the Lord's, by myself, that takes real work for me. And that's something that requires more discipline than praying with a friend or engaging in worship with others. I think one of the things that has been helpful for me to reinforce and remember is that Jesus actually wants me to pray out of need, not just out of duty. I think there are many things that it's important for us to pray for and about that you could categorize in the area of duty, or praying for the needs of others, praying for the salvation of friends and family. These things where I think prayer actually should be hard work for us in many dimensions. But I think there's also this angle of Jesus actually wanting me to pray out of need, and noticing that and reminding myself that in my frequent moments of weakness, that's actually a little wake-up call to me, a little signal to me, oh, I need to pray. And I think that for me has been helpful as I've grown, or am in the process of growing, my sort of puny spiritual muscles. And I think recognizing as well, it's very easy for us as Christians to feel like God will use us most and best when we're sort of all put together. Yeah. The idea of needing other Christians to help us, like, that's okay sometimes, but that's really it's a sort of second league kind of Christian thing to do, is to sort of need others. I'm increasingly convinced that actually we're sort of meant to need each other. Yeah. And I often find that I'll experience particular weakness at times when God seems to be using my writing or speaking or whatever it is. And so I think that's something that I've needed to wrestle with and orient around in terms of my own sort of inner spiritual life, of being sure to give myself to the Lord in the midst of that, rather than giving into just a sort of sense of shame or I don't know, a sense of like, why am I so weak right now? That actually the Lord does use us in our weakness, and it's as he spoke to the Apostle Paul, my grace is enough, my power is made perfect in weakness. I think sorry, keep going. No. I kind of hate my weakness. I don't want it. but I think the Lord actually uses in that. So I think that's part of what I'm exploring in terms of intimacy with him, is recognizing that.
Well, I think in some ways, we have a church full of people who are incredibly competent. They're educated, or they're successful in some way. And then suddenly they're put in a situation where they're at work. And one of the most ordinary pastoral conversations I've had in the last 6 weeks are something about anxiety that my boss is not, or my manager or my supervisor is not seeing me perform. And so I'm anxious that he doesn't see me, or she doesn't see me. And so therefore I can't prove myself. I got a project done in 2 weeks, and it's like blank air between now and the next 2 weeks. How do I show myself? And there's this anxiety and real weakness of not being able to prove yourself. And so I just hear you talking about is that's kind of the sweet spot for spiritual intimacy in life with God, is that vulnerability of not being able to prove that you're okay.
Yeah, and I'd almost go a step further than that and say that I made a comment at the beginning of a talk I gave a little while ago for a women's ministry group, where I said, I could tell you one story of my Christian life where you'd be like, oh, wow, what a wonderful woman of the Lord. And I could tell you another story where you'd say, why did anybody let her in the building, let alone give her a microphone? And I think there's this idea that anyone in any kind of professional ministry, has it all figured out spiritually, is some sort of, internal spiritual hero. Maybe that's true. I'm willing to believe that is true of some Christians in leadership. My suspicion is that there are probably many Christians in the pews on a Sunday morning who are far more the spiritual hero than those of us who might be standing up on stage in various places. Yeah. And so I think the encouragement that I cling on to is one of the things that the pastor of the church where I was a student taught, which was, as you go further on in life, the sign, or one of the indicators that the Lord is actually doing work in you is that you become more aware of your own sin. Yeah. It's not that you kind of go on in life and you think, oh, look at me, I'm becoming so sanctified in every area. And am I not so much more of a spiritual hero than I was even last week? Actually, it's more of an awareness of your own weakness and sinfulness that might be the sign that God is, in fact, at work in you.
Yeah.
Which I don't want to say that as an excuse for lack of discipline. As I say, I think the language of spiritual disciplines is helpful and important, because I think we do need discipline, and we need accountability both with ourselves and with others. But I think knowing that actually the Lord isn't surprised by our weakness, and he isn't even necessarily disappointed by our failure, but that he can use us as we submit ourselves to him in the midst of our weakness and failure.
Yeah. So in your own life, you mentioned just spiritual disciplines. We call them rhythms. We often call them disciplines as well. But what sort of rhythms and disciplines and practices that have helped sustain you and grow your life with Christ? Especially you've moved countries, you've moved different places, and you've got a family. And what does, through seasons, what are sustaining practices and rhythms?
Yeah. It's funny, actually, before the pandemic hit and my girls, they could no longer go to school, I have a just 10-year-old, a nearly 8-year-old, and a almost 2-year-old. So sort of full range there. I'd been through this rough process of thinking, okay, I was so programmed in my spiritual formation as a student and young adult that you needed to read your Bible in the morning, that there was it's particularly magic to read your Bible before you start the day. And then I was in a situation where I had a very small kid as well as the 2 older ones, and an increasing need to actually properly start exercising, rather than just sort of assuming my body will work great for the rest of my life without any kind of investment. I'm thinking, gosh, being able to actually read my Bible first thing in the morning is becoming increasingly challenging, and I feel like it's just kind of getting squeezed. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to make the bold step of instead reading my Bible during my son's nap time in the afternoon before my girls are home from school. It was great. I was exercising in the morning and then having a shower, having a bath. I'm English, so I have baths, not showers. And then I was having my quiet time during Luke's nap. And I was like, yes, this is fantastic. And then the pandemic hit. Suddenly everybody's home. There is no kind of... And so now it's like, sometimes I'm reading my Bible in the morning on my phone, lying in bed when I'm awake and no one else is. But if I get up, I will wake my son who sleeps in the hallway. Sometimes I'm waking up so early that it's not going to wake him and I can be downstairs sort of opening a Bible by myself. Sometimes I'm reading during his nap. And so I just share this to say, real talk, particularly for the parents out there, we don't always have control over our schedules, and having a rhythm, but a rhythm that you are able to flex as needed and say, okay, actually today, this isn't going to work at this time. I've got to move it to here.
Yeah.
In terms of other rhythms, so that's for my own individual time. In terms of other rhythms, we have a family Bible time that we do in the evening, which is very simple. We sing one song, which is either with me playing the piano incredibly badly or my husband playing the guitar equally badly, or last night my daughter playing the recorder quite badly. And then we read a little passage and we ask questions and we pray. It's very simple, and I think but a really important part of our family rhythms. And then I have a prayer call with a couple of friends on a Friday, and I walk and pray with a neighbor believer on a Sunday afternoon. So again, for me, particularly as an extrovert, it's super helpful to have some relational connection in the midst of prayer and spiritual disciplines. And I think whereas it is profoundly important for us to have time by ourselves engaging with the word and with the Lord, I think also it can be easy for us, particularly as sort of 21st century Westerners, to discount the community things, in particular the sort of family things, as if those are lesser somehow. When in fact, I mean, the reality is most Christians through history have not even been literate. They haven't been sitting down with the blessing of the Bible to read about themselves. They've been engaging in corporate worship in various forms. And so just to be able to embrace that and see that as equally part of the daily spiritual formation that's going on.
Well, do you know the story of Susanna Wesley, right? John and Charles Wesley.
Who had so many kids, she was like hiding under her,
She threw her apron over her head to read her Bible, and her kids knew not to mess with mom during that moment. And there's a woman in our church who, she's got two young boys who are rambunctious, and now they're at home and they had just started going to school. But what she had done previously, she just had her Bible open on the corner of the dining room table to the passage that's in our Bible reading that day. And she would pass it. And in those 5 or 6 minutes, just to sit and read a passage, meditate on it, and then go back to whatever she was doing. She just had it always there open during the day, just in that small season, to where it's just like, I either have to get up at 5:15 and then be a mess and be a messy monster for my kids the whole day, or trust that there's the sustaining grace over the long haul.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I was just going to add, I have a deal with a friend to help me exercise in the morning, where we'll typically text each other and say, hey, I worked out, woohoo. And that's really helpful. I've had a number of times with friends who are wanting to get into the practice of reading their Bible daily, but that's just not part of their rhythm yet. I've sort of done a deal with them where I've said, hey, why don't we both read Matthew's Gospel? And we'll read a bit at whatever time of day we're reading it. It doesn't have to be the same time of day. And then we'll text each other with just a couple of thoughts from it. And doing that with a friend for, say, a month has just helped them kind of get off the ground in terms of working that into their daily rhythms. So again, I think there are ways in which we can be helpful to each other in community, even when it comes down to the individual disciplines.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Okay, so imagine there's just last question. There's a young Christian who feels the need or the longing to be with God, intimate, and you've probably already answered this in some form or fashion, but I just want to get started with a life with God. I'm busy, or I'm whatever. How would you encourage me just to get started? And maybe here's just maybe even a background. For many of us, we don't know how to get outside of the performative individualism aspect of our life.
Yeah.
And sometimes we take that into our spirituality. We spend more time framing a picture for Instagram of our quiet time rather than engaging in our quiet time. And so, how would you, in a body of people who are constantly impacted with that kind of world, how would you encourage us towards a life with God in that way?
Yeah, I think what I was mentioning earlier about praying out of need, at least for me, is a big piece of that, because it means that I'm bringing to the Lord what is really on my heart. And just as with our closest friends, we're willing to say to them, hey, I know I'm looking kind of smiley on the outside, but here's what's really going on. So with the Lord, to be able to do that and to know that he meets us in that, and not, I think it's easy because we know of the Lord's holiness.
Yeah.
It's easy for us almost to subconsciously kind of shy away from bringing him our real struggles and fears and doubts and anxieties and all the things. But he's the one person who already knows all of our thoughts and runs towards us instead of running away. I mean, honestly, anybody else who could steal my thoughts through the day, that would ruin our relationship. Jesus is the one person who does see those things, and he wants me anyway. So to just continue to remind ourselves of that, and to notice those moments when we're feeling need and we're not, and we're sort of tempted to close in on that, or to just sort of numb it with internet scrolling or whatever it is, to see that as a moment to bring ourselves to the Lord. And the passage I find most helpful on that is John 11, when Jesus is talking with Martha, after letting Lazarus die on purpose and before raising him from the dead. He's talking to Lazarus' sister and saying to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me, even though he dies, will live, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And that's a verse that I will often kind of ponder on in the midst of need or pain, and say, okay, do I believe this, that Jesus is my resurrection and my life, and that he's not a means to an end to change my circumstances, he is the end? Do I believe that now? And if I don't believe that now, am I crying out to him to help me believe that now in this moment?
Yeah. It is hard to encourage honesty when you obviously don't want to be seen all the way down to the bottom, because you're afraid you won't be loved all the way as well. But yeah, there's that grace, and it is amazing, how many times the Psalms just seem to be honest, whether even with anger or with worry or complaint. And those are God's words for us to pray. He gave us those words. And so, yeah, that's good. Well, I'm really, really grateful for the time you gave us. I was encouraged, and I know our community will be super encouraged. And yeah, blessings to you. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Take care.